quickly, for those of you who are just meeting one or both of us for the first time, I'm Noelle D'Amico, Director of Social Justice at the Worker Circle. The Worker Circle is a Jewish social justice organization that has been around for 124 years, fighting for our democracy and the rights, like workers' rights, immigrant rights, racial justice that we all need. And we are a proud partner of the Center for Common Ground. And let me pass it over to Andrea.
Oh, thank you, Noel. Center for Common Ground, we have been in existence since 2018, and we are a civil rights organization. We do mobilizations and GOTV work, and it is our mission to empower the voters of color to be able to fully participate in democracy. And tonight, we're going to be looking at no matter where you live, you got an elected representative, federal and state. Tonight, we're doing federal, that will be somewhere near where you are. You do not need to go to Washington, D.C. to lobby your federal elected representatives. So tonight, we're going to be talking about our bill for February, the Freedom to Vote Act, messaging on voting, and then there will be a section on the actual mechanics of meeting with your representative, what you do after the meeting, and democracy circles. So next slide, and let's get going. There are two bills, and we need to have them both to really fix the voting problem that we have in the United States. Last month, we were working on the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. We are still waiting for that bill to be introduced in the Senate. This bill sets up the criteria for determining which states are going to be subject to pre-clearance, meaning if they want to change laws around voting, they're going to have to go to the Department of Justice and get those changes approved. Now, the other bill, and the one we're focused on tonight, is the Freedom to Vote Act. Now, that is an omnibus bill. What do I mean by that? It means that it's actually a bunch of individual bills that have been cobbled together, so that the idea is if they can pass all those bills at once, theoretically, it saves a lot of time. All right, next slide. Now, the Freedom to Vote Act, S1 by Amy Klobuchar and HR1, John Sarbanes. In other words, the first bills introduced in this legislative session. S1 has 51 Democratic co-sponsors. HR1 has 214 Democratic co-sponsors. So that means if your House member or senator is a Democrat, they have already co-sponsored this bill. If your electeds are not, they need to co-sponsor this bill. All right, now, this bill as an omnibus fixes a lot of problems that state legislatures have created. It also sets a federal baseline for elections. Now, Alabama and Mississippi currently do not have early voting. This bill says all 50 states must have at least 15 days of early voting. Virginia has 45 days of early voting, so we're good. It also says all states must have no excuse vote by mail. And again, Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, and some other states do not have that. What a lot of people do not realize about this bill is it includes the Democracy Restoration Act, which means it says upon release from prison, people with felony convictions will be able to register and vote. So that's why it's a partner. The John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act says no new bad legislation is going to be allowed to be introduced. And the Freedom to Vote Act fixes the bad legislation. It's already out there and evens the playing field. Next slide. Now, it sets up and expands voter registration. Now, there is automatic voter registration when people reach the age of 18. Just like when you turn 65, you're eligible for Social Security. This is now automatic voter registration at 18. This now says all states will have automatic pre-registration for 16-year-olds. And if you go in the DMV and you update your driver's license because you've moved, that will automatically update your voter registration record. All states will now have same-day voter registration. Now, right now, there are only 2 states that do not offer online voter registration. All 50 states will need to offer it. And it also says states may only require the last 4 digits of your Social Security number. That means Virginia will have to change their voter registration form because we ask for the full number. Also, for people living in low income housing, voter registration information will be included in those documents that people sign because they're moving. So this will be the opportunity to capture that move and ensure that people are registered. It will also be very important and included in all naturalization ceremonies and for victims of domestic violence, stalking, trafficking. It will require privacy policies to ensure that the public nature of voter registration, that they are protected. In other words, they'll be allowed to use PO boxes and not their literal addresses. Next slide. Early voting.
Before you
Yes.
get on to that next slide, I just want to say to everybody, if you're looking at this and you're saying, wow, that's a lot of stuff to remember, don't worry. As you see the next slide, you're going to see even more provisions. But remember, when we go in to talk to the senators about this bill, it's going to be not all the details of the bill that you have to remember, but the impact that it will have and the problems that it's solving. And you know your own experience with that as well. So we're going to get to that later. I just don't want you to get worried or lost in the details. And do remember, you'll get these details after the presentation. Sorry to interrupt, Andrea. Jump back.
Not a problem. And one of the other things is some of these detail points may be very, very important to you personally. And that may be something that you will add as part of your personal story. Now, as I mentioned, early voting, there must be a minimum of 15 days of early voting. New York only has 9, and the early voting locations must be open 10 hours a day. The hours of early voting must be uniform, and there must be hours before 9 and after 5 to allow working people to early vote. And there must be one Saturday and Sunday voting is now required in all 50 states. Now, this will be for the main early voting location for each county. Satellite locations, extra early voting locations are not subject to these rules. And this is the big one for me. College campuses are required to have one polling place. If you are not in a vote by mail jurisdiction or a small jurisdiction, less than 3,000 voters. So this will be community college campuses, HBCUs, universities. They will have a polling place right on campus.
It's
Next
so
slide.
important, Andrea, because I
Yes.
was just visiting colleges, right? And I have a son who's looking at all different colleges, and we went all over. And we went to a certain college that's in Nashville, whose name I will not say, but it starts with a V, and it's got a pretty big old student population right there. But guess what? They don't have a polling place on campus. So all the students, and the administration, they go through all these permutations to get transportation, to bus students to vote. Why in the world are we doing that? There are solutions here. It's important. And imagine if you're a student, you have to give up how many hours of your day? You miss your chem lab, you don't get your work done in time, you have to turn in a paper or take a test. You can't go necessarily. So these are such meaningful changes. Some of you who work in hours that are, in the meat of the day, and you can't get home and to a polling place in time, the way things are set up now, this early voting and these other hours will allow you to get there, will allow the people that in our neighborhoods to get there. This is such transformative legislation.
Yes, yes, yes. So we already talked about 15 days of early voting. All voters will be eligible to early vote. All voters will be eligible to vote by mail. This is another biggie. It will limit the circumstances when voters can be removed from the voter rolls. Right now, most other states purge people from the voter rolls or not voting as often as they think you should. And it also guarantees election day is officially a federal holiday. So you should get the day off with pay. Although we recommended everybody early vote. Next slide. I mentioned it ends felony disenfranchisement upon release from prison. Every person will be now entitled to register and vote in any federal election. So I love that because Virginia is still one of 3 lifetime felony disenfranchisement states. So Virginia, Kentucky, and Iowa are the 3 states where if you have a felony, unless your rights are restored, generally by the governor, you are, quote, not going to be able to vote for the rest of your life. Now, this is also going to be very important in this upcoming election. It would establish a new criminal offense if you hinder, interfere, or try to prevent someone else from registering to vote, or you are helping someone register to vote. So we really need this for this upcoming election. We won't have it, but we will be working to get it.
That's
Next
right.
slide.
That is
Next
right. You
slide.
might remember that last election, the people who were videotaping at drop boxes, the people who were trailing people after they had voted or before they had voted, that constitutes the kind of interference we're talking about. That's what
Right.
this bill would stop.
Yes, yes. It requires states to conduct post-election audits for federal elections. It outlines the criteria for redrawing congressional district lines, and it will prevent mid-decade redistricting. Normally, we are supposed to redraw the lines every 10 years. Um, Now, campaign finance, a lot of people forget that campaign finance was a bipartisan issue with the McCain-Feingold legislation. John McCain and can't remember his name, but Russ Feingold. So it expands the prohibition on campaign spending by foreign nationals. It requires the additional disclosure of campaign-related fundraising and spending. We require additional disclaimers on certain political advertising, and it establishes an alternative campaign finance funding system for certain federal offices. Now, very important, this is federal elections. This will apply to all federal elections. People are going, well, what about the states? Well, now the question becomes, if states, and most states have their federal and state elections at the same time, do they really want to operate under a double set of rules? And most states are going to go, no, that's okay. One set of rules is enough. Next slide. Here is our February letter. And so we have two main letters. As I said, if your senator or representative is a Democrat, they're already a co-sponsor. So we have one letter for everybody that is a co-sponsor. And we are thanking them at the beginning of the letter for co-sponsoring the Freedom to Vote Act. If they are from the other party and they are not a co-sponsor, we are urging them to co-sponsor and vote for the legislation. That is the only difference in the letters. When people do the right thing, you want to make sure they know you are recognizing they have done the right thing, and we say thank you. Next slide. And if you want to deliver a letter, we've got a link, cfcg.news/February action. You will be able to go in, and yes, the link's going to be shared in a follow-up email, and you will be able to say, on this date, I am going to go and deliver a letter to this Senate or House office. And then people can see you're delivering a letter, and you might get some folks who want to join you.
That's
If
great.
you want to deliver the letter all by yourself, and I don't want to tell anybody I'm delivering, all right, fine, you can send us an email and let us know. All right, next slide. And messaging on voting. Let me check how I'm doing on time. I'm a little bit late. So again, we talked about these two bills together. ensure that everybody, regardless of race, background, zip code, creed, color, that is a citizen should be able to cast a ballot in every election where they are entitled to vote for the candidate of their choice. All Americans, young ones, new ones, old ones, deserve an equal voice in all of the decisions that are going to impact our lives. Next slide. Now, do you want to join me with this one when we're
Sure.
talking about? All right. I'll do the real background stuff.
Okay.
Um, engaging with members of Congress.
Andrea,
We are,
before we
yes.
move on there, we have a question in the chat about the Freedom to Vote Act.
Oh,
And
yes. All right.
Clifton was wondering, let's do a few minutes in case there are some
All
questions about
right.
what was just presented. Clifton writes, it was my understanding that within the Social Security Act, it was not to be used for identification purposes, question mark. Do you know anything about that,
Yeah,
Andrea?
yes, I do. And Commonwealth of Virginia ignored that. The Social Security Act was very specific. The Social Security number was only to be used by Social Security. It was never to be used for any other purpose. And Virginia just ignored that.
There you have it. I mean, unfortunately, that does happen. And that's one of the reasons that we want you to ask those questions and we can give you responses. Are there other questions that we want to look at this on this legislation? We know it's a huge and important piece of legislation. Again, our hope is that when you get these slides, you're going to say, hey, that story is really my story. That provision meets up with what I have experienced, or it meets up with a core value that I hold that I think is important. And so remember, you'll get all of this in email following the presentation. So I'm not seeing any more questions. So let's move on to our part of the presentation where we talk about, all right, now you know a bit about the Freedom to Vote Act, and you'll have a letter that you can drop off in the district office. What happens next? How does this work? What are best ways to engage your members of Congress? I'll kick it back to you, Andrea.
All right, thank you. And when you are talking to your members of Congress, state legislators, local, you are working to influence, persuade them, pressure them to do what you, as a voter who can put them in office, want them to do. The key here is to be consistent and persistent. What we are hoping many of you will do is develop a relationship with the staffers and the members in their local office. Now, in DC, yes, they expect the professional lobbyists, and these are the people that track bills and everything and know what's going on. When the folks back home show up at home, it's like, wow, this is a horse of a whole nother color. The people back home are paying attention. So, a huge engagement opportunity. Next slide. Oh, Noel, this is you. Your
So
voice
a
matters.
little more about this, and this goes back to what we were just talking about earlier with all the different points. Your role is not to be a bill expert. Your role is to talk about why this bill matters to you, why it's important, the why you support this bill and why they should support this bill really is the center of this. And so how do you best do that? You know, they hear from a lot of lobbyists. We're not that. What are we? We're human beings. We have our stories. We don't exist in a vacuum. We exist in communities of relationship. Maybe you're a member of a congregation, or maybe you're involved in the PTA, or maybe you're a person who's been out in the streets protesting for our democracy. Wherever you have those connections, think about the values that shape who you are, what is important to you. And when you go to visit, it is your stories and your values that will make the difference. And think about it, right? When people tell us a whole long list of itemized points on something, we might be able to track it for a while, but what do we really remember? We remember people's stories. The stories are incredibly powerful, and they're important to people who are already co-sponsors of the bill, as well as those that we wish to convince to become co-sponsors of the bill. These stories then in turn can be used by those who support the bill as they make their arguments to their colleagues, as they're on the floor arguing for this in the Senate. Your stories really matter. So as you're thinking about it, ask yourself a few questions. Does this bill help or hurt you directly? If there are new changes in this bill that will make it easier for you to cast your vote, you want to zero in and say, look, here I work from a shift where I go from 7 in the morning until 7 at night. And then by the time I commute home, there's no way to get to my polling site. My state doesn't have sufficient early voting, and this bill would make it possible for me to vote because there have been some times that I haven't made it there in time. Good, just an example. Whatever it is, if it impacts you directly, or if you happen to be a leader in your community working with a population of people, maybe it's older people who are not physically able to get out, and the mail-in piece of this is critically important. Maybe it's a person that has had polling sites close, and this will ensure polling sites locally. So whatever that is, you want to help bring those stories forward. Do you support this because of a core value? What is that value? Maybe that value is equality. When you're thinking of things, if it comes in a particular framework, like, I don't know, a religious framework or something, think about, is there a way to translate that? You can use your own language about it, but what also is the translation of that into more universal values? That'll help communicate the broadness of what you're trying to say. And then you've perhaps witnessed the impact of others, or you might have your own family story. You know, when the Worker Circle was doing advocacy on this bill in the past, one of our members had grown up in Germany after World War II. And she said a very memorable thing, which was during the visit, you know, people often would say to me, what if you had grown up during the time of fascism in Germany? What would you have done? And she said, but the question isn't that. The question is, what would I have done in the years prior to that to make sure that didn't happen? And she talked about the weight that she felt as a young person that had grown up there, and to see certain things happening in our country right now, this was an imperative for her. Let me tell you, that staffer remembered that story. That was a really critical story. You have your own stories, stories from your family, stories of yourself. Legislators always need to be able to point to the constituents behind them that are pushing them forward for the bill. They never want to be out on a limb somewhere. They want to be able to say, my constituents made me do it. And so make them do it, you know, give them all of the support that they need to go in and become champions of this bill. And then finally, again, remember, this member of Congress will be making their case publicly in all sorts of ways. You won't necessarily see it in the room, but you may see them on the media, or they may be in back rooms trying to argue, and they say, you know what, let me tell you a real world story about this. So your stories matter, your voice matters, you can truly make the difference. Let's do the next slide. So with us, why do we engage our elected officials? It might seem a no-brainer to many of us on the call, but it actually is something when people think about democracy, they often think about voting, but not necessarily all the other actions that we need to have a robust participation in our democracy. And one of those things is elected officials. First of all, it's our responsibility. It actually is our duty. I'm going to use that word, duty. It's an old-fashioned kind of word, but it's a word that means more and more in these days when we see so many things weakening before us. Our democracy requires our participation, because you don't strengthen it by going, oh, I'm really worried about our democracy, I hope somebody does something about it. It's actually ironic. You strengthen democracy by strengthening democracy. In other words, it's your participation, it's my participation that actually rebuilds the sinews of democracy. And frankly, all power is local. All power is local. All politics are local. You have so much influence when you go to your district office, because that's where you live. They're in your area, right? It connects you to the person who is representing you in Congress. And frankly, democracy is a bipartisan issue. And I think we need to claim it as such. There is a long track record of bipartisan support for voting rights. Now, some of that has been diminished in recent years, and we don't have to pretend that hasn't happened, but we can make a case that for democracy to function well, we have to make sure that every single person can cast their ballot freely, fairly, without interference, no matter what their zip code is, no matter who they are. Next slide. So again, one of the things is you may never have been to your district home office, and I don't want you to feel like it's a lesser office. It's really important not to feel that, because it actually isn't. The district office it's it's in some ways a little bit insulated from the professionalized atmosphere in Congress, right? If you go lobby in Congress, you've got these beautiful halls that you're walking through, and there's statues and golden this and that, and you might see very people in Armani suits with briefcases, and you think, okay. And we go in because we, the people, this is our democracy, right? But if you go and look at some of the district home offices, they're not, friends. It's like they're in office parks, they're in strip malls, they're in the, they're very ordinary buildings. So, first of all, these buildings often don't get visited as much as you might think. And your members of Congress really respect when you come there and you make an appointment and you go in there and you share what you think, because it's about developing a relationship over time. It's not a one-time thing. What we're hoping in this series that we're doing monthly is you'll go by, you'll drop off a letter, you'll have a conversation with them, and then guess what? You'll be back the next month on another democracy bill, and they'll say, hey, didn't I hear from you last month? And you say, yes, isn't it? It's just great to see you again. I want to thank you for your support, or I want you to take a real good look at this one, So you develop that relationship. And honestly, no matter whether you're there to support the position that your senator or your member of Congress has taken, or whether you're there to oppose it, you will be treated with respect in that office. So if some of you are going into offices and you're thinking like, oh, I'm not quite too sure about this, I know that senator doesn't support this, I'm really worried about it, it's okay. Trust us. You're going to get to that door. The receptionist at the door will welcome you. You will be treated with respect. Next slide. So we've talked a little bit about this. Every visit you're actually learning something more about your elected official. So think of it not just as you want to think of it as a two-way conversation, right? You don't just want to go in there and blah, 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 blah. Here's everything you need to know. Thanks very much. Out the door. No, 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 no. Put on your investigator's hat because you can learn an awful lot about the way an elected official thinks. And if you follow this idea of repeated visits, you'll get savvier and savvier with how to make arguments that really they can hear. Sometimes we try and it sort of feels like, oh, well, it looked like it was going into left field, but it went foul. That one didn't work, So you come back and you try again, right? We don't give up. This is stuff we really believe in. And every visit you give them the opportunity to talk, but then you listen, 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 listen to what they or their staffer is saying, because then you bring that information back and you think about that a little more. You think about it with your peers. You say, all right, now we know this. Next slide. So Andrea, I'm going to kick this to you.
Oh, all right, all right. What we want to do is effective legislative advocacy. So no matter what they say, we always have another step. So if we originally go in to see a legislator and they are not currently a co-sponsor, then we want to at least get them to, all right, let me look at this again and think about it. If they were on the fence, they were thinking about it, you want to turn that into a, yes, I will be a co-sponsor. If they are a co-sponsor, remember, you're coming to see them one time a month. They see their colleagues every day that they're on the Hill. You want them to turn that yes into, can I help build support? So whenever I was in an office and I had a supporter of the bill, are there other members that I should see?
Okay, let's do the next slide. So just remember, it's your right to do this, okay? It is your right as a citizen to get in there and make your voice heard. It is your right, if you're an organization that's a 501c4, to talk to elected officials on issues. And it's a right if you belong to an organization that's a 501c3 nonprofit, like congregations, or like my organization, which is not religious, but a cultural organization, where the Workers Circle, we might have some limits, but we are able to talk on these issues. So know and feel empowered to be where you are and that you have a right to do that. Next slide. So setting up the meeting, how does this go? It's actually not all that hard. You make an official request in writing, you follow up with a phone call because, you might email them and you're not hearing a response. So be persistent, follow up with a phone call. I sent an email. I just wanted to touch base on that. You ask to meet with a legislator or with the appropriate staffer. Now, some of you may think like, oh, I didn't get a meeting with my senator. They're dissing me. No, actually, sometimes getting a meeting with a staffer is extremely helpful because the staffers have a lot of influence. They are the ones that read the bills from start to finish. They're the ones that make it, give advice to the elected leaders. So meeting with a staffer is not bad. It's great, actually. So don't view it as, less than if you're scheduled to be with a staffer. Now, where can you meet? So obviously there's the Capitol office, that's in DC. We're not talking about that. But you would meet in the district office. And of course, this is still times of COVID, and or also for ease. If you want to bring people together on Zoom, Zoom is a perfectly acceptable way to do it. Now we're giving you a letter, And you can sign that letter, and maybe 2 or 3 of your friends that are making the visit might sign the letter. But if you want to have even additional impact, you can always get more people to sign the letter. You might bring it to your PTA meeting, or you bring it to your soccer club, or you bring it to the church that you go to, or you bring it wherever, and you get some more people to sign. You don't have to do this. Don't let that be a barrier to making a visit yourself. But if some of you are connected to communities, you can enlarge your voice by doing that. Next slide. So how do you find your legislator's district office? Well, they make it easy. Here's how you do it. Basically, you look it up online. And if you have any difficulties or worries, you can always reach out to us. We're happy to help you. Next slide. So as you're preparing the visit, you don't want to bring a cadre of like 30 people, because what you're trying to do is engage with them. There might be a point where you want to do a semi-visit / demonstration. You show up with 50 people and try to pack the house, but that's not what we're talking about this time. We're talking about really engaging the staffer or the senator and really listening. So 3 to 5 people is ideal. You want to be as diverse as you can. We often at Worker Circle bring a multi-generational delegation, and we found that the presence of younger people, even teenagers, they don't have to be eligible to vote, makes a huge difference. If you can't muster 3 to 5 people, you can still do this on your own. I don't want you to feel that you can't, but it's ideal if you can bring a few people with you. You always want to be respectful. No matter what you receive back from people, who knows, things could get hot sometimes in a meeting, but you stay respectful. You want to show up earlier than your appointment. You want to dress nicely. That means, nicely, not like you rolled out of bed, because it shows respect for the democratic process. And of course, when you're going as a team, it's always good to practice. Next slide. So we suggest the following breakdown. If you have 3 to 5 people in this meeting, and some people can play more than one role, these are the roles we suggest. One is the facilitator. This is the person who introduces your group, says why you're there, make sure that meeting is moving forward. If somebody gets really impassioned and talks too long, you move on your colleague a little bit. So Emma, I know we're waiting to hear from you. Could you jump in? You do that. That's the facilitator. The storytellers, these are people that bear those stories that we want to make sure the elected official hears. What's the asker? The asker is the person that when you're done sharing what you're sharing is actually going to make the direct ask. And we're going to get back to that, what that means in a moment. The educator is the one who says, look, this is what this bill would accomplish, provides a few facts, and is also the person that if the person has a question about the bill that you don't know the answer to, the first thing is don't worry about it. Say, gosh, I don't know the answer to that. I'd be happy to get back to you. And then you get back to them promptly. So what's that asker? Once you get all the way through, if you're asking a person who does not yet support the bill, you want to make the ask, which could go something like this. Senator so-and-so, are you willing to co-sponsor the Freedom to Vote Act? And then you wait. Don't say anything. Let it hang there in the air. If you're talking to a staffer, that person probably won't commit on the spot, but you can do the same thing and everybody just zip the lip until they respond to you. And then you might have a follow-up question for them from that. And then finally, at the end, what you want to do is make sure that somebody the whole time has been taking notes, right? That's the secretary person. And that person is making sure to listen very closely to what the staffer or the senator says. Then you thank them, you shake hands, you leave the meeting, and you follow up right away. And you say, thank you so much for meeting with us. main points of what you said in the meeting, and you asked about X, Y, or Z. We'll get back to you on Tuesday, or here's the answer to that. Boom. So that they know that you're a serious person, that you are a respectful person, and that you're a person that will get them information that they need in a timely way. Next slide. So we talked a little bit about this. I'm not going to go over this again. You'll get this in the follow-up slide along with a toolkit that we'll be sure to send you. But introductions, why you're here, the story time, the ask and answer questions, again, the wrap up and thank you. Next slide. So yes, this is probably self-explanatory, but it is worth saying. You don't just want to come at them with a million points like a tornado, right? You want to pause. And if the staffer looks like deer in headlights, or even if they don't, it's good to take a breath. Do you have any questions on that? Just pause, and they might say no, or they might say, actually. And then if they say something that you don't understand, don't just sit there and not understand it. Ask for I'm not quite sure I understood. Could you explain that again for me, please? And they'll explain it again. Again, listen for how they're making the argument. Next slide. So the effective ask is right here. Straight to the point, be silent. Follow-up questions, if they say yes, who else can you bring along, right? If no, that's when you want to say, what would it take for you to support this? That's a very important, you don't just like give up when they say no. You say, what is it? What's the barrier? Why not? Tell us more. Next slide. And then what do you leave behind? You leave your letter behind. Okay, next slide. And again, following up, thanking, and then you think about your next meeting. And remember, this is a process over time. You nurture that relationship. You're always looking for common ground and building upon it. Next slide. The thank you letter. This is all about that, and you'll get this. Next slide. And we're off to democracy circles. Let me just pause here because I know we have a few minutes. So I just want to see if there's any questions that people have on that overall presentation. One of the things that we really want to stress to you again, we're going to say it again and again, is build the relationship over time. Don't think of this as one and done. And you will get all of the links to the slides as well as a toolkit that lays out all the steps just for you. So you can not have to worry about note taking right now. All right. So what do you do after you make a visit? So you've gotten a few of your friends together and you've made a visit and you're feeling great, but you're like, what's next? Well, one of the things that you can do is make a democracy circle. And a democracy circle, very simply, is a small group of people who gather together to think about our democracy, reflect upon it, and take action together. So a democracy circle is about bringing people that you know together to fight for our democracy right where you live. Each democracy circle is started by a convener, and a convener is simply one that picks the meeting time, picks the place, and invites some people together. And this could happen on Zoom, or it might happen at your kitchen table. It might happen at your congregation. And the idea is that you're bringing people together to reflect and take action to see how we can counter these attacks on our democracy right now. We at the Worker Circle, in partnership with the Center for Common Ground, will provide all of the resources and training that you need. You just need to bring your passion, your values, and your people. Next slide. So democracy circles build power by gathering and equipping the people with whom you're already connected. And it's an adaptable model as well that can take the form that you need in the way that makes sense for you. Democracy circles are an entry point for people who want to do something right now about the loss of our rights and the erosion of our democracy. And there are two main elements of a democracy circle: action and reflection. Next slide. Democracy circles take action in all kinds of ways. Some people write postcards with the Center for Common Ground or phone bank make to voters of color in states with harsh voter suppression laws to help cast ballots. Others recruit friends and neighbors to become nonpartisan poll monitors or join protests and rallies, or, like we did tonight, make visits to their senators or members of Congress. We provide a take action guide that has a wide variety of actions that democracy circles can take together. And democracy circles don't only act together, we reflect together. So we provide evidence-based discussion resources to help democracy circles reflect together about the state of our country. And this discussion resources are constantly updated. They're updated regularly. We've got over 36 of them now, and we're constantly in there, constantly updating. These discussion resources also include questions for discussion. So it's not just a thing, but it's a set of questions that you can use to delve into the topic and draw people into conversation. Now, some of these resources might be an article from the Brennan Center about the latest wave of voter suppression laws, or they might be about the history of Reconstruction or about culture. Some are videos that you can watch, others are poetry to discuss, and some encourage you to share your own stories. Next slide. You don't need to have any previous experience to start a democracy circle. It's designed to be very straightforward and easy. When you sign up, the Worker Circle Social Justice Organizer, Noah Barron, will set up a time to talk with you, walk you through everything. We'll think about, what could your circle look like? What are your ideas and hopes for what your circle could do? Next slide. Democracy circles build power and community. One of our Worker Circle members and a Democracy Circle convener put it like this: democracy circles allow us to share our ideas and our feelings with other activists, be heard and hear others, and get and give support and have agency to not feel as helpless as we might in the face of rising fascism in this country. Because after all, we know the best answer to fascist politics is engaged citizens who know their history, who understand the building blocks of democracy, and who can take action together to ensure political equality and the full participation of all Americans. So I hope you'll think about starting a democracy circle for yourself. It's very easy to get started, and I'm going to just drop into the chat a little link that can help you get there. You just go to democracycircle.org/democracycircles, or you can email Noah Barron.
Thank you so much, Noelle, for helping me save my voice, which is getting worse.
Thank you, Andrea, for persisting and sharing your expertise. And you know what? Your voice rang with the truth of democracy. So it doesn't matter the laryngitis, but we know it's an effort. So thank you so much for persisting. We want to thank all of you too for joining tonight, for taking time out of your schedule. We know there's a lot of other things you could do and a lot of pressing concerns from family and from work, but tonight you made time to be here because you know what time it is in our country, and we're grateful for you. I know a lot of you are out there working diligently all across the country, and to those of you who might just be getting started, be encouraged. You are not alone. All across the country right now are people like you who care, are putting their shoulder into this work, and together we're going to get our country moving in the right direction. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I want to remind you that we do this each month. And so we have another presentation coming up in March on the 15th. And Josie, if you could drop that into the chat, that would be wonderful. There's a link right there where you can register. You'll also get that information in the follow-up email. And we hope that you'll bring a friend with you, right? We all know somebody who probably wants to learn a little bit more about what's going on and what they can do to help. So thank you, all of you, for your time tonight. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Josie from the Center for Common Ground, who's managing our Zoom. Go out there, be empowered. Our democracy is up to us. Take care. Good night, everybody.